In this lecture, we're going to cover what is probably the most favorite topic of all the topics we cover in personnel psychology: job performance. Job performance is a measure of how well someone does their job. It's a record of the outcomes that are associated with a specific job in a specific time period. It includes behaviors that are relevant to both the organization's goals as well as those behaviors that are directly under the employee's control. The potential to perform, the ability to perform well, is what we are trying to predict with our selection tests. By measuring applicants' knowledge, skills, abilities, and their other characteristics like personality, interests, education, experience, by measuring KSAOs, we are trying to figure out who is going to do their job well. There are several different types of performance that we might look at: task, contextual, organizational citizenship behaviors, counterproductive work behaviors, and adaptive performance. Each one of these categories of job performance measures a different aspect of the work of the job. Task performance is the most straightforward type. It's the one we often think of when we hear the phrase job performance. Task performance is a measure of how well someone completes the basic duties of the job, how well they do the tasks of the job. These tasks are part of the job description and, of course, vary from job to job. Each one of us in our work has different tasks, activities, responsibilities that we are supposed to complete on a daily, on a weekly basis. This type of performance is best predicted by tests of cognitive ability, knowledge, and skills. In the early 1990s, two researchers, Borman and Motowildo, introduced a new type of job performance: contextual performance. This is a measure of how well employees contribute to the social and the psychological environment. These behaviors are not explicitly required. They're not part of the job description, but these are behaviors that most managers, most leaders will expect their employees to partake in. The original model included 4 elements: persistence of enthusiasm, assistance to others, following the rules and procedures set forth by the organization, and defending the organization's goals. This type of performance is best predicted by personality tests, namely those based on the Big Five model. Organizational citizenship behaviors are also related to the social and the psychological environment, but these behaviors are not required by the job description, and they're rarely talked about by managers and leaders. These are the extra role behaviors that go above and beyond what any manager or leader would expect. Examples of OCBs include helping others when you're not required to do so, treating your coworkers with respect, which is something we hope everyone does, but we rarely include it in a job description. We rarely speak about it one-on-one with our followers. And saying positive things about the organization. OCBs are best measured with personality tests, especially the conscientiousness dimension. Interpersonal deviance is one type of counterproductive work behavior. It includes harassment, gossip, fighting, verbal abuse. The other type is called organizational deviance: theft of property, theft of time, sabotage, tardiness, absenteeism, leaving early, long breaks, unnecessary sick days, sloppy work. All of these behaviors that you see on this slide are behaviors that we don't want in the workplace. In order to prevent them from happening, we need to measure them. We need to measure the presence of them or the absence of them. Campbell and colleagues added a 5th type of job performance: adaptive performance. This type has become even more important since it was first introduced in 1993. As the nature of work changes, as technology advances and updates, as our world evolves, we then have to adapt and evolve. In many organizations, the ability to adapt is important to job success. Adaptive performance then is a measure of how well employees can adapt to their work environment. It includes things like their ability to handle stress, emergency situations, and uncertainty, ambiguous situations. It also includes their ability to learn new tasks, to learn how to work with new technologies, and to learn new policies and procedures. Adaptive performance also includes the ability to adapt in social situations, the ability to adapt to cultures, to the norms and the expectations of different social groups. In addition to these 5 types of job performance, we might also look at effectiveness and productivity. Effectiveness is a measure of the outcomes of job performance, the outcomes of someone's effort on the job. We call the outcomes outputs. For example, we might look at the number of jobs completed, the number of customers served, the duration of a task, how long it took someone to complete a specific part of their job, the volume of units produced, and the financial value of the service or the product produced. Like job performance, effectiveness is also impacted by both the organization, things that are not within the employee's control, as well as behaviors that are within the employee's control. Productivity then is a comparison of the outcomes of job performance and the cost of achieving that performance. Output divided by input. Examples of inputs include things like the amount and cost of labor, the volume and cost of supplies, as well as the energy consumed by the organization in producing the product or in delivering the service. I have a quick example at the bottom of the screen. If we sell 36 properties and it takes 4 real estate brokers to sell those properties, we can say that our productivity level is 9 properties per agent. This is a useful way for organizations to measure how much they're creating and how much it requires to create it. Performance management includes both performance appraisal and performance measurement. We're going to cover measurement and appraisal in this lecture, but both of these processes are part of the bigger picture of performance management. Performance management is a forward-looking process, and it is based on the organization's goals. We use performance management to define performance, to measure it, to communicate expectations about performance, and then to improve performance. The performance management system links individual behavior to the organization's goals, strategy, mission, vision. The little picture is connected to the bigger picture. It's usually best if a performance management system is developed using input from both managers and employees. When we give employees a say in how the system is designed, they're usually more likely to participate in that system and actually do their jobs. Performance appraisal is just one aspect of performance management. Appraisal is the process of evaluating performance, of measuring it, appraising it, assigning a value to each employee's performance. The appraisal process also involves feedback, providing constructive feedback in the hopes of improving performance. Performance measurement is part of performance appraisal. In order to appraise, we need to have some type of measurement system put in place. Measurement involves collecting information from employees in terms of the behaviors they use and the outcomes of those behaviors. Some organizations use annual performance reviews in an attempt to improve performance. But the research is clear that the appraisal process should be continuous. It should be something we're doing on a daily basis, measuring performance, giving feedback, measuring performance, giving feedback. Here is a simple depiction of the steps involved in performance management. First, we conduct a job analysis. Then we develop the measurement tool we will use to evaluate performance. We communicate performance expectations, what we want employees to do. We then measure and rate their attempts to fulfill those expectations. Then we conduct a performance appraisal where we officially evaluate and then provide feedback. The last step is to follow up after that feedback has been delivered to see if performance has improved. Personnel psychologists use performance data to do a number of different things. We use the data to validate selection tests to determine whether or not they truly are predicting high performers. We can use the data to establish expectations and then make a plan for communicating those expectations to all employees. We use data to make staffing decisions and administrative decisions about who to hire, who to terminate, who to train. We also use performance data to design training programs, to evaluate those training programs, and to help us plan employee development programs and opportunities. We will talk about training and development next week. In the second week of class, we covered some of the legal issues that we need to pay attention to when it comes to the employer-employment relationship. Many of the laws that apply to selection tests also apply to performance measurement. For instance, the Civil Rights Act and the Age Discrimination in Employment Act both apply to performance measurement. We cannot discriminate against protected classes, and we cannot discriminate against individuals 40 or older when it comes to performance measurement. Our selection tests have to be validated, and our performance measurement tests also have to be validated. Both selection and performance management, again, are doing something similar in that we're measuring behavior. We're measuring something. When we measure behaviors, we have to be careful that our measurement tool, our selection test, is not somehow giving one group an advantage over another group. The 4/5 rule also applies to performance measurement tools. Employers are more likely to lose a lawsuit when that 80% rule is violated, when evidence of adverse impact can be provided by the employee. And the courts really want employers to make an effort in their performance measurement tools. Don't just use some off-the-shelf tool because it was cheap and easy to use. Performance measurement needs to be customized for the job and for the organization, just as a selection test should be customized and specific to that organization. Before we learn how to measure job performance, let's look at some of the strategies we can use to make sure that the overarching performance management system is as effective as it can be. First, we want to make sure that measurement and appraisal are happening on a continuous basis. It should not be something that is happening just once a year. Second, we want to make sure that we are specific and precise in how we define and measure performance. The more specific, the more precise we can be, the better off we are defending our system. We should focus on only job relevant criteria. We should make sure the system aligns with organizations' goals, and we should seek input from both managers and employees, as well as customers, distributors, suppliers, investors, and other stakeholders. Again, the more information we can collect, the better our system will be at measuring performance as it should be. We also want to make sure that all of our employees understand how performance measurement happens in our organization. We want to make sure that they understand what to expect from the appraisal process. One of the most important things we can do is use multiple raters, just as we do with selection tests. And just like we do with selection testing, we want to make sure that we train our raters, that our managers, our leaders understand how to use the measurement tools, how to use the rating scales, what the definitions mean, how to total an individual's performance score. It's also important that we try to fix any problems we identify. Sometimes there are situational constraints, like lack of resources, that prevent employees from doing their job to the best of their ability. If we are able to identify problems like this, we should do our best to try to correct them. So we might try to acquire resources, tools, equipment, software for our employees so that they can better do their jobs. Like any other HR system, we need to evaluate our performance management system and make sure that it's working the way that we want it to. We should conduct periodic audits of the measurement tool, of the appraisal process, of the bigger picture, to make sure that employees are being treated fairly and that our tools are valid measures of job performance. By doing all of these things, we increase the likelihood that our system works and contributes to our competitive advantage. There are three broad categories of performance measures. The first category is objective performance measures, which collect information from quote-unquote impartial sources. We might collect information about an individual's volume of sales. We might look at the number of clients that they recruited. We might even look at their customer satisfaction scores. In many cases, we are looking at quantitative data. We're looking at numbers when it comes to objective performance measures. These measures produce data that is independent of the employee's judgment and of the manager's judgment. That's the advantage of this measure. The disadvantage is that objective measures are influenced by factors that are outside of the employee's control. Now, many of us don't like the idea of being hired, fired, promoted based on things we can't control. We don't have any control over how a customer is feeling in the moment. Therefore, customer satisfaction scores encompass a part of job performance that many of us may not perceive as fair. So they do have their limitations. Personnel performance measures collect information from employees' personnel files. Things like their absences, their tardiness rate, how many times have they been reprimanded for their performance? How many times have they been recognized for their performance? The third category is subjective performance measures, which collect information from people. This information is more likely to be biased because the human is involved in making a judgment, but the advantage of these measures is that they can help us capture information about aspects of the job that we wouldn't otherwise be able to measure. For instance, how friendly is an employee? How much do people like working with that employee? These questions are difficult to answer using objective measures and personnel measures. Subjective measures give us additional information, another piece of the pie. In the middle part of this lecture, we're going to cover some of the rating systems that we might use to measure performance. Absolute rating systems produce a measure of an individual's performance with no consideration for how other people in that same job, other people in that same department, other people in that organization. There are 5 examples here of different absolute rating systems, and we'll cover each one. I'll show you an example of each one so you can see what it might look like. Graphic rating scales are the most popular type of rating system that we use to measure performance. Here you can see job tasks on the left and a scale that runs from low to high, from poor to distinguished. The labels that we use differ. Sometimes we use words like I have here, sometimes we use numbers 1 through 5, 1 through 6. All of these scales are measuring the extent to which employees perform tasks or display behaviors on the job. Weighted checklists allow us to do the same thing that graphic rating scales allow us to do, but weighted checklists add the weights. They allow us to assign different values to different tasks. So you see here, again, we have behaviors on the left and a scale that runs from low to high on the right, but in the center, we have the weights that are associated with the different behaviors. Here, maintaining professional relationships with one's clients is considered to be more important than maintaining up-to-date knowledge of the industry. Using the critical incident method, managers are required to share very specific examples of behaviors that employees demonstrated when they performed effectively and when they performed ineffectively. With the critical incident method, the rating scale is blank, and managers are required to fill it in with their own ideas. So as you can imagine, sometimes this method takes a little bit longer to complete and requires a lot of thought on the manager's behalf. Behaviorally anchored rating scales are some of the best, most valid rating systems that we can use. These scales require raters to grade performance along a continuum, 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 10. The behaviors that are expected at that level are already included in this scale. In terms of a nurse's performance, for example, we might use this scale. On one end, we have low performance, and that includes things like failing to follow the doctor's order and not completing required training. At the other end of this scale, at the high level, it involves following the doctor's orders and completing all training. These anchors help us determine where an individual falls along the continuum. Behavioral observation scales look like the other scales, but the major difference with these systems is that they require raters to measure the frequency with which they observe someone behaving in a certain way. The other scales focus more on the quality of performance. Is it low? Is it high? Behavioral observation scales focus on the frequency that a manager observes someone meeting quarterly goals, responding to customers' needs, anticipating customers' needs. In a few slides, we're going to cover some of the rating errors that cause a problem for our rating systems. These rating errors can be reduced if we also focus on frequency and not just low, medium, high levels of performance. In addition to measuring each individual's performance in a vacuum, we can also compare employees using what we call employee comparison methods. Using simple ranking, we simply rank employees from best to worst, from top to bottom, from 1 to 10, according to how well they do their job, how well they perform a certain behavior, how proficient they are on various dimensions. Paired comparisons are another method that we can use to help us make better decisions about who truly is the top performer and who is the bottom performer. This method requires raters to compare each employee in a work group or a job title with every other person in that group. Look at the top row, employees rated for creativity. We have employee A, B, C, D, and E. If we compare employee B to employee A, employee B wins and gets a plus sign. If we compare employee C to employee B, there is a negative sign. Employee C is not better than employee B. If you look at the B row, and the B column, you will see that there are 4 pluses in the B column and 4 minuses in the B row. What this means is employee B beats out all of the other employees. The final rating system we'll cover in this lecture is group order ranking. This method forces raters to place a certain number of employees in each of several predetermined categories. This system forces us to put 2 people in the top category, 7 in the middle category, and 4 in the bottom category. Those categories then help us make decisions about who to hire, promote, and terminate. So who is expected to fill out these rating forms? Who measures employees' performance? It's obvious that managers and leaders are usually the primary source of performance data, but we can also conduct what are called 360-degree performance evaluations. It's a great big long phrase for a very simple idea. We collect performance data from a variety of people who interact with an employee. So for instance, we might collect information, of course, from direct supervisors, but also from customers, from other people in the department that work with that person. We might collect information from peers, from their direct reports, and even from the employee themselves. Sometimes self-assessments have a place in performance management systems. By relying on a variety of different sources, we assume that the resulting data is a more accurate view of an individual's job performance. Supervisors are more familiar with the organization's goals, and they're able to both evaluate results and reward performance. Unfortunately, supervisors are not always able to observe every aspect of performance, of typical performance, everyday performance. Peers are also able to evaluate both effort and everyday performance, but they are influenced by their friendship with employees, by their desire to compete for resources, and they typically rate the higher performers more harshly than they do lower performers. Direct reports are useful in holding their managers accountable for undesirable behavior and can be an important part of behavior change. It is motivating to many managers when they know that their direct reports collectively agree that manager has a weakness that needs to be improved. Direct report data is useful when a manager has a large number of direct reports. An upward feedback system requires an enormous amount of trust between the employees and the managers. Other stakeholders can be useful to inform the strategy when it comes to how do we tie performance at the individual level to the organizational level. Customer data is especially important for customer service-oriented jobs. The major disadvantage of customer data and information from other sources is that these people don't understand the organization's goals, they don't understand the context. By asking people to rate their own performance, we can increase perceptions of fairness. People usually perceive a performance management system to be more fair when they've had an opportunity to share insight, to provide information in its design. It can also help us improve their motivation and reduce the defensiveness they may experience during the one-on-one sit down with the boss. The problem is that self-ratings are not appropriate for promotion decisions and extremely susceptible to leniency error. We are easy on ourselves and hard on others when it comes to rating performance. There are a number of challenges associated with 360-degree performance evaluation systems. I have a couple of strategies that you might use to address each one of these challenges. To address rater fatigue, make sure that rating forms have been customized for the rating source. You don't want to include 12 questions that are not relevant to that position. Those 12 questions just required a human to spend 12 minutes or 24 minutes that they could have otherwise spent doing something more productive. In order to address employees' fear of retaliation, make sure that the rating system is confidential, even better if it's anonymous, although that causes some administrative challenges. When it comes to upward feedback, we should make sure that we have at least 3 direct reports who are participating in the process. And sometimes we need even more to help protect the identity of people rating and sharing feedback with their boss. Sometimes performance measurement results in data and information that employees are not happy about, that they don't receive very well. In these situations, it's important for the feedback giver or the manager to help that employee set goals for improvement. All is not lost just because your performance data was not positive this quarter. There is something we can do. There are ways that we can improve. So it's important that managers set goals and give employees hope for the future. We can also use coaches, people who have a specialty in appraising performance, giving that feedback, sharing that information, and also someone who can work with that employee one-on-one to make sure that they fulfill those improvement goals. A coach is essentially someone who works very closely with employees to improve performance. One of the other challenges is a lack of follow-through. Managers and employees both have a tendency to not always follow through with the promises that they make during the annual performance review process. I would recommend sticking with developmental purposes. As with any system in the HR world, it's important that top management supports the process, the procedures, the policies associated with that activity or that system. When it comes to 360-degree performance evaluation, top managers' support is key to making sure the whole system functions like it's supposed to. If top managers don't take the process seriously, if they joke about it, if they make fun of the process, that information trickles down every level of management until it reaches the employees and they realize that nobody takes this system seriously, so then they don't take the system seriously. If you want to improve performance, the system has to be structured, customized, and top leaders must support it. One of the things personnel psychologists are worried about when it comes to performance measurement is rating errors. These are the errors and the inaccuracies that we sometimes make when rating performance. For example, halo, central tendency, severity, and leniency errors. All of these can be intentional or they can be unintentional. The major problem with these errors is 1, they increase the risk of employment discrimination, and 2, they're difficult to eliminate. The good news is we do have strategies and techniques we can use to minimize the bias. For instance, relying on different performance measures and different rating sources can help us minimize the impact of these errors. The halo error occurs when raters choose one level of performance to describe performance across multiple dimensions. We call it the halo error because we can draw a circle or a halo around all of the scores. You can see here in this example, the halo is over the 2 rating. The central tendency error occurs when raters stick to the midpoint of the scale, when they choose 2, 3s, and 4s on this scale. The severity error occurs when raters are unusually harsh in their ratings of performance. They stick to the low end of the scale regardless of the criteria being evaluated. The leniency error is the opposite of the severity error. This occurs when raters stick to the high end of the scale, when they rate employees the highest they can on multiple dimensions. There are many other types of errors, bias, and misattributions that can occur throughout the evaluation process. Things like the availability error and the fundamental attribution error are all applicable to rating performance. There is some evidence that what is called frame of reference training can help us minimize these errors. This training tries to calibrate the rater's understanding of performance and their understanding of how to use the rating scale to evaluate performance. These types of training programs get everyone on the same page. They explain the organization's definition of a particular dimension and how an organization expects the rating scale to be used. This program provides an opportunity for raters to then practice evaluating performance and give feedback in a safe, controlled environment. This type of rating training can reduce errors' likelihood of making these errors, and it can also improve their observational skills, their ability to pay attention to the important aspects of performance and then communicate their feedback to employees to actually improve performance. How do we know which rating scale we should choose? We look at a number of different factors, including the potential for rating errors, the accuracy of ratings, the psychometric characteristics, whether a scale has been shown to be reliable and valid, and we consider perceptions of fairness and the reactions of managers and employees to a specific rating scale. If our managers hate using a rating scale, it might be worth it to change that scale, because if they hate it, they're probably not using it the way that it was designed. If employees don't like a particular rating scale, it also makes sense for us to make updates to ensure that they stay engaged in their jobs and continue to try to perform at least at the minimum level, if not above and beyond. In the last part of this lecture, we're going to learn about performance feedback, about how to give constructive criticism so that employees are motivated to improve their performance. Before the feedback session, before you sit down and give feedback to an employee, you want to make sure you do a couple of things. First, make sure that you've already established performance expectations and that you've shared the rating form with employees. No one likes to be surprised when it comes to their job. Give them the information up front so that when you talk about undesirable behaviors or low ratings, no one could say, well, I didn't know, no one told me. If no one told them, they have a legit reason to disregard the information that you give them. Second, you want to make sure that you ensure anonymity of rating sources. You don't want the people receiving feedback to know where the feedback came from. 3, make sure that your raters and supervisors, those giving the feedback, are comfortable with giving feedback. Make sure that they've been trained and that they understand what is expected of them in their role as the facilitator of this feedback. Then, when you sit down with the employee, make sure you start out by explaining the purpose of the meeting and how important the meeting is. Encourage employees to participate throughout the conversation. If they have questions, they should ask them. If they have concerns, they should share them. You can incorporate self-ratings to help break the ice, but also to find out if employees have an accurate perception of how they're performing on the job. Of course, we want to avoid feedback that is based on someone's traits, their character. We don't want to make fun of anyone, and we don't want anyone to feel bad when they leave the meeting. Focus on specific job-related behaviors. That's very important. Behaviors, behaviors, behaviors. The things you see people do, the things you can observe them do or not do. Make sure you give lots of examples. If you've kept a journal or a diary, you can actually refer to dates and the very specific behaviors that you observed on those dates. Finally, to structure feedback, start by identifying the specific behavior that needs to be corrected, then explain how that behavior impacted the organization and performance. Third, explain what should be done differently. In terms of behavior, we might say something like, when you are late for meetings, Very specific, late for meetings. What? Late, when, for meetings. The consequences. When you're late for meetings, it hurts our team because it wastes our time and we're not able to get through all the things that we need to get through. Behavior and why it's a problem. The final part is the preferred behavior, what we want the person to do in the future. I'd like you to find some way of planning your schedule so that you can get to the meetings on time. That way you can be productive and we can all keep our tight schedules. What happens after the feedback session is just as important as what happens during it. After you share constructive feedback, you want to meet with your employees regularly to help them set SMART goals and to provide additional opportunities for them to practice and for them to assess their progress in terms of meeting these improvement goals. Now, these improvement goals are on top of their typical everyday work goals. These are something additional that they need to work on. Make sure that rewards are tied to improvement. Only those who improve get those rewards. If you reward everyone for making an effort, it demotivates those who are really trying their best to make improvements. And continue providing feedback on a regular basis. Share your thoughts, share encouragement, try to inspire them. Let them know that you notice their effort. Throughout the performance appraisal process, there are a few things that we want to avoid. Do not focus on traits or personal characteristics. Don't focus so much on the past. Try to have a forward-looking perspective. Help people improve instead of shaming them for their undesirable behaviors. Don't admit that you don't like the process. I know that the typical performance management process is not always fun and exciting, but it's important to the organization's success. Take it seriously, and your employees will probably take it seriously as well. Don't be argumentative, don't be defensive. This is not the end of the world if an employee doesn't agree with your evaluation of their performance. It's just one meeting. There will be plenty more for you to try to correct performance and correct perceptions. Don't take it personally, but don't get defensive. Don't interrupt the meeting for non-emergencies. Remember, you want to take the process seriously. Turn your phone on silent, get away from your computer, shut your office door, make sure that you've cleared your schedule to give plenty of time to have conversations with your employees. And finally, try to avoid making rater errors. It's very easy, especially when we're crunched for time and energy. It's very easy to get lazy when we rate employees' performance. Keeping a journal, a diary of some sort, keeping track of dates, very specific examples of behaviors can help us reduce rating errors. If it's in the budget, rater error training may also be useful. Make sure you rely on multiple raters and multiple different types of measures, objective, personnel, and subjective measures of performance. There are a lot of moving pieces when it comes to job performance, and this topic is the focus of personnel psychology. Now that you understand job performance, how we measure it, some of the considerations we have to make when trying to evaluate it, next week you'll learn how to improve performance, how to design a training program, development opportunities so that employees can grow and become the best versions of themselves at work.